Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is Movie Night. World War II has probably been responsible for more movies in the last 80 years than any other topic. And for good reason. It was the most cataclysmic disaster, military operation, war in human history, at least so far. But for some reason, since that terrible conflict ended in 1945, over the years we've been seeing more and more depictions of Superman-like qualities in those that fought it, or this massive black and white of right and wrong, and actually World War II had a lot of blame to go around. We also see the people who fought it over the years becoming marble men. Everybody who was in World War II was a hero, and they were the greatest generation, which is a term that only came out in the 1990s when Tom Brokaw wrote a book and used that as the title. If you go back to the 1950s, when most of the veterans who fought in that terrible conflict were still around, the movies had a lot more in the way of realism. Not everybody who fought in World War II was a hero. There were plenty of cowards, and there were plenty of madmen. In 1951, a man named Herman Wouk wrote a book called The Caine Mutiny. It was a novel based on some of his experiences in the Navy during World War II. And a couple of years later, it was made into a movie, and that's the one we're going to talk about today, The Caine Mutiny, starring Humphrey Bogart, Jose Ferrer, Van Johnson, Fred MacMurray, if you remember who he was, and a lost star named Robert Francis. It was put out by Columbia Pictures in 1954, and it was not about heroes. It was not about massive battles and drama. It was about the typical American Joe who got caught up in that war, and the casualties that were not necessarily as the result of an explosion or a gunshot. Now, Humphrey Bogart is always thought of as the tough guy, as the detective in the Maltese Falcon, or as the American expatriate in Casablanca, as a gangster, as this or that. But he was actually a very talented actor who could play a very wide range of subjects. And this is one where he plays a naval captain of a minesweeper in the Pacific who over time has lost it. And a crew of men who are just as flawed, and a situation that was almost fatal to many involved. And I'm not going to go into the whole story here. A lot of you have probably seen the movie. I was able to review it. I hadn't seen it in many years, and I was shocked to find out it was now in color. And I'm not a big fan of coloring old black and white movies, mostly because the quality is usually not that good, and black and white movies were never meant to be in color. That's the way they were filmed. But actually, this one wasn't so bad. I was able to tolerate it. The movie is set in the Pacific during the latter part of that conflict in the Pacific Theater, where the Japanese are on the run. And one of the things about this is it's brutally honest, and it was relatable to many people who served in the Navy during World War II. At first, the U.S. Navy did not want anything to do with this production because it shows a mutiny, which has never occurred on an American warship, at least successfully. Back in the 1800s, there were a couple of attempts. But they saw it as a way of humanizing the real casualties in war, which are those that end up suffering mental illness. And this is why the movie is so timely now. We have a lot of people waving the flag over going to war with various countries, especially those in the Middle East. And the people who fought in World War II knew what can happen if you get into those situations long enough and how they can eventually break you. Humphrey Bogart's character ends up suffering from something called paranoid delusion, which these days is a growing problem in the United States. Have you ever run across somebody who believes the earth is flat? Well, that's what they're suffering from. Different levels of it, but when they believe that there is a massive conspiracy out there against them, they're in the same boat as Humphrey Bogart's character in this rather telling movie. Now, this movie was very successful at the time. It made more than 10 times the amount that was put into it. It was, I think it cost $2 million, and it made about 20. It was nominated for a whole bunch of Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best a lot of things, but it didn't win anything. But it really resonated with the World War II generation, and that's one of the reasons you should watch it. It was real. It was pretty much what it was like. It was not all heroism. It was not all people who were out to defend king and country, because in this movie there are heroes, there are villains, there are victims, and there are cowards. Now, another interesting thing about this movie is one of the stars in it was on his way to being probably the leading actor of the time, right up with Charlton Heston, and that was a man named Robert Francis, and this was one of his early movies. And sadly, this young actor who plays an ensign in the story, he died a year later in a private plane crash, about the same time James Dean was making his name in Hollywood and would also have a very, very sad end. The other thing, too, that's an interesting bit of trivia I found out in looking at this movie is Michael Caine, the actor. Remember him? He's still around, although I don't think he's in anything anymore. Anyways, Michael Caine's real name is Maurice Micklewhite, and he was trying to come up with a name for his acting roles at the time. He was very young, and he was just breaking into the acting business, and he thought of making his name Michael White, because who's going to go notice a guy named Maurice Micklewhite? But he went out to the movies, and he saw the Caine Mutiny and said, Michael Caine, that would be a good name. And I was reading up, and he said if he had gone to another movie, it would have been Michael 101 Dalmatians, which is a pretty funny line there. Now, this is a very important movie to revisit because it deals with mental illness and how it can affect anybody. And I'll tell you something, the most riveting scene in the history of military motion pictures is the last one, where the lawyer, played by a young Jose Ferrer, comes in and really reads the riot act to a lot of the men who had to rise up against their captain. And it is going to get you in the heart, because it shows that World War II was not a glorious war, because in reality, none of them are. Again, the movie is The Caine Mutiny. It came out in 1954, put out by Columbia Pictures, starring Humphrey Bogart, Jose Ferrer, Van Johnson, Fred MacMurray in the days before My Three Sons, and the potential superstar that never was, Robert Francis. You can find it up on YouTube. You have to pay for it there. I was able to find it in a few places where it shouldn't be allowed to be given away, but if you look for it, you'll find it. I was not able to find a black and white copy of the movie, and personally, I like to watch things in the original format they were made, but the color version is not so bad. It's worth watching. It's family-friendly, and it takes the glory out of war, which is what a good war movie should do. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies, whether or not they like war movies or Humphrey Bogart. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, don't forget the popcorn, and always watch the credits till the end. Good day.